The lighthouse is deep within the St. Mark's Wildlife Refuge, 11 miles in. There are a few trees near it, but mostly it's surrounded by marsh and water. Normally, when people arrive at the lighthouse, they can get close, but they can't go in.
It wasn't that long ago that this lighthouse was closed and boarded up. And you'd come out here and you walk around. There wasn't a whole lot to see and do. You take some pictures. We have some pictures of snakes around the bottom. That was the excitement.
But 2 or 3 times a year, the doors and windows are thrown open and the public is welcomed. On this day, it was opened in honor of the members of the Florida Lighthouse Association.
It was fun because we've been here many times, and when my wife and I have been here, we haven't had the opportunity to climb. But since they hosted our meeting, this was an opportunity for our members to climb.
Stan Farnham is president of the Lighthouse Association. Their goal is to raise money for the renovation and support of Florida's lighthouses and history.
And in the communities throughout Florida, the 30 remaining historical lighthouses are usually the oldest structure there. So they're the best single source of the history of Florida and to teach and show people.
They all had a purpose. Each one was a little different, whether it was on the ocean here or on rivers and lakes. They were here to protect the people that were helping to build our country.
We've had people here for 350 years. French pirate ships, Spanish conquistadors, German submarines, Confederate steamboats. So you see the whole panorama of human history, in a sense, through the lens of the lighthouse, if you would.
Andy Adele is a ranger at the St. Mark's Refuge. Dressed in a replica uniform of a 1920s lighthouse keeper, his job is to bring the history of the lighthouse to life.
Looks like we're pretty sure welcome to St. Mark's Lighthouse and the tower. This is the oldest part of the building. It was built in 1842. It's withstood over 100 hurricanes. Second oldest lighthouse in Florida, second oldest lighthouse in the Gulf. You're looking at the spiral staircase, the only wooden staircase now existing in a Florida lighthouse. 85 stairs, the first 72 are wooden, the last 13 are iron ship stairs.
This is not the first St. Mark's Lighthouse to be built in this spot. The original was built in 1829, but when it didn't pass inspection, it was torn down. The second lighthouse was completed by 1832.
That one immediately had erosion problems, started to fall over. They actually had to put hoops around it like a barrel to keep it up. And it only lasted 10 years. In 1842, this tower was built, and this tower has stood there ever since.
That third tower almost didn't survive the Civil War.
But we do know that by the end of the war, all that was left was the tower with the top 10 or 15 feet blown off, and the inside had been burned out.
In 1866, the lighthouse tower was finally restored and reinforced. The walls are now 4 feet thick and sit on a 12-foot limestone base. The height of the tower was also increased to 85 feet. It can be an exhausting climb, more so when you think about the 40 gallons of kerosene the keepers would bring up twice a day.
We're directly below the lantern room. This is the highest room that's also the safest. In the 1870s, we had a family of 12 stuck in here tighter than we are today, and they survived a storm that battered and shook the tower all night long. These are the last stairs. These are 13 iron ship stairs. We know for a fact they've been here over 100 years, and it leads right up to the tower room, the lantern room.
While there's not much space inside the lantern room to move around, the view from the top of the lighthouse is extraordinary. Even on this rainy day, you can see how isolated the spot really is. And you wonder about the people who lived and worked here.
This wasn't a one-person job, even though you had a lighthouse keeper. It's basically a family job, and the whole family worked at it. All the kids had chores.
Lighthouse Association member Bill Roberts was one of those children. His father was a lighthouse keeper in Carabel and then later on Cape St. George. He remembers how he pitched in as a child.
We lived in the assistant keeper's house. I helped him shine brass. I helped him paint fences. I helped him do the watch. In other words, I was his assistant keeper.
This whole family was dedicated to keep that light running every night for the safety of people at sea. And that's the important story here. Often, if the lighthouse keeper, something happened to him, for instance, Mr. Fine died in 1903. Well, Mrs. Fine took over the very next day. You can see in the logbook his handwriting stops, her handwriting takes over.
Mrs. Fine continued on as the lighthouse keeper at St. Mark's with her 8 children until 1907 when she died. She was one of 2 women to hold that position at St. Mark's Lighthouse. In one of the rooms of the keeper's house, a special display has been set up to honor the lives and the work of the women lighthouse keepers.
There's a certain romance to lighthouses. There's a romance to the sea, there's the romance of the isolated person, of the families waiting, of the, I think, of the tension of the ships coming, the storms. All this makes for a certain wonderful romance that we have around lighthouses. Of course, the truth isn't exactly that, and I think that's one of the things we'll try to tell people about.
The St. Mark's Wildlife Refuge expects the ownership of the lighthouse to transfer from the Coast Guard to the Fish and Wildlife Service later this year. When that happens, they plan to open the tower to tours and renovate the keeper's cottage. The refuge wants to create a museum so that everyone can learn about the history of the lighthouse and the lives of those who made it possible. For Dimensions, I'm Suzanne Smith.
Until the lighthouse becomes open to the public, keep checking the refuge website at www.fws.gov/St. Mark's. For more information about the Florida Lighthouse Association or other lighthouses in the state, go to floridalighthouses.org.